So, hello and welcome to lecture number 13, Limits to Growth. This time, another invited lecture. We left off with some looks into, let's say, a little bit of esoteric economic aspects.
Esoteric? This is about decision making.
Yeah, and now we're getting back to the real actual science with a real actual expert on economics. So, very glad to have him here. Very excited because I have not seen this lecture before myself, and I also do not know much about this topic as a failed economics student myself. So, very much welcome, and please enjoy the show.
Thank you. Okay, I do. Okay. Is this fine?
I think you need to start the video, I guess. I already did. Video is on.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you, Benjamin, for this kind introduction. My name is Roland Menges. I'm professor for economics at Clausthal, University of Technology. And of course, the topic of the whole lecture, of the overall lecture, is limits to growth. And I've seen that you cover topics from circular economy and so on. Today we will talk about the common good, and we will have to talk about decision making, especially collective decision making. But I suggest this has nothing to do with esoteric science. Yeah? This is hardcore economic science. You will get contact to, let's say, at least 5 Nobel Prize winners in economic theory during the next 60 minutes, I suggest. Okay, let's start. Common good and collective decision making. This does not work, but this works. Okay. No. Sorry. I use the mouse. Okay, that one. Okay. Okay. Okay, so let's start with a very simple question, I suggest. Yeah? Dictatorship, absolutism, oligarchy, what's that? From a certain perspective, we can say so a social state that corresponds to the preferences of the rulers is deemed collectively better. Yeah? We think about Donald Trump, or we can think about kings and so on. And of course, that's the reason why, with respect to collective decision making, we agree upon preferring democracy. Yeah, what's democracy? Most of us would say, yeah, democracy is majority vote. So, of course, it's our task to generate knowledge. Yeah, in science, of course, we want to generate knowledge. But the knowledge, the insights we create depend on the quality of our questions. And raising questions, I suggest raising questions is a core topic of a researcher. Raising questions does not mean raising doubts, but the quality of the answers or the insights we generate depends on the quality of our questions. So let's start with a very simple question. Can democratic majority decisions make the world a better place and promote the common good? Usually we would suggest, yes, it's better to have democratic decisions, majority decisions, with respect to, let's say, Greenland, for instance. Yeah. Okay, let's cite the first Nobel Prize winner, Amartya Sen. Maybe some of you are aware of Amartya Sen, 1977. He suggests the following. Take the problem of a division of a cake among n individuals. Yeah? N should be greater than 2. Pick the worst of person and take away half of his share. Throw away half of that and then divide the remainder among the rest. We've just made a majority improvement to raise social welfare. Amartya Sen suggests still further, repeat that exercise. So he concludes the majority rule cannot really serve as a basis of welfare economics. Okay, let's cite the second Nobel Prize winner in economics theory, Hayek, Friedrich August von Hayek. He told us the crucial conception of the doctrinaire Democrat is that of popular sovereignty. This means that majority rule is unlimited and unlimitable. Therefore, he concludes the ideal of democracy, originally intended to prevent all arbitrary power, thus becomes the justification of a new arbitrary power. Okay, raising questions. So to start, we have to warm up with raising some, let's say, philosophical questions. Democracy and collective autonomy. First one, we start with collective autonomy. We think about individual autonomy. We go back to Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant told us that individuals give themselves the rules by which they act, and this is autonomy. Autonomy, therefore, for him is self-legislation. He suggests only the reduction of moral rules to one's own will, which is simultaneously universal, explains the obligation. Moral rules are an expression of free will. So this is about individual autonomy, and here we can also cite Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was interested in collective autonomy as a subject of practical philosophy. And he suggests that citizens give themselves the laws by which they act. So self-legislation therefore means freedom of the will. We can think about two ideals here, direct democracy and indirect democracy, but this will be too complicated to go into details here, but we keep in mind this topic also is about collective autonomy. So next step, democracy and collective rationality. Now we have to talk about rationality. Next step is starting here with him. James Buchanan, also Nobel Prize winner in economics theory, and he raised the question, what is politics actually? His central starting question is, what kind of goals do individuals seek to realize through political action? So let's start how this consideration works. He separates his ideas into 5 sub or partial considerations. The first partial consideration is with respect to the difference between private and public welfare. So maybe you know in economic theory, any kind of model is based on individual behavior. Yeah? So we are interested in individual decisions, especially market decisions or market transactions. And the basic idea in economic theory is, okay, anything we observe there is driven by the wish to maximize utility, whatever this is. Yeah? So individuals are driven by the wish to maximize utility when acting as market participants. So the question is, can we make the same assumption with respect to the political field of interaction, or let's say the social interaction? Buchanan and Brennan suggest that there are two ways to describe social interaction, interpreting social interaction as a certain kind of exchange process between individuals. On the one hand, economic theory prefers a positive theory, describing what individuals try to express on the political marketplace. Right? This is driven by the model of the rational behavior, the model of the Homo economicus. The alternative to this is to skip the assumption of rational behavior, the Homo economicus, and assuming that individuals think when they act or when they vote, think about including the interest of other parties. So at the starting point here, I would like to raise the core hypothesis or the core thesis of the contractarian model. And this is public and private welfare can differ, of course, can differ. Yeah? This means the public good may exist, or the common good may exist, but if it exists, and we assume that it exists, there are these goods, or the common good is perceived and valued internally by individuals. So this good represents a subjective category related to the acting person. So this means the common good does not exist in an independent sense. Next step. Okay, what is politics? Let's compare politics to other parts of social interaction. For instance, let's start with science. What is science? What's the idea of science? In science, individuals interact, they work together, and they recognize the existence of a non-individual and, let's say, universally accepted value. Usually when we engage in science, we say, okay, we start with certain hypotheses. Yeah, we try to prove this hypothesis with empirical measures, something like that. Yeah? So the idea is that the validity of a hypothesis should be verified independently of the value judgments of the scientists involved. So the question is not, does this hypothesis X, for instance, or the hypothesis is, does this, expresses the other way around. The question is, does hypothesis X correspond to the truth? And the question is not, is this hypothesis useful for me or for the scientist involved? Okay, that's science. And we can ask, okay, is politics a bit a science? Yeah? Also, in politics, individuals interact and work together. Yeah? But what about political votes aimed at discovering the common good? Yeah? Do we ask, is, for instance, in a political election, is candidate A better suited than B, the candidate B, to discovering the existing common good? Or do we ask, is candidate A better than candidate B in terms of my interest? Next example, a jury. What's a jury? A jury, you can see a jury on this picture. A jury is an example of both interpretations of politics. Yeah? The actions of the jury are similar to those of science. The jury is an institution tasked with determining the truth or the falsehood of a hypothesis. So when this jury is in search for a decision or for a consensus, yeah, we can think about several cases. We can think about the guilt, for instance, of a person, or we can think about the verdict of the jury. The search for truth relies on specific criteria, for instance, consensus criteria. Here, the consensus of the jury is of, let's say, instrumental value or instrumental importance for the efficient functioning of the institution. What does this mean with respect to politics? Is politics a community of discoverers? If we agree upon this, next question arises, why should politics be subject to limitations? Why should politics, if politics as a community of discoverers, why should this process be subject to limitations? It is Knut Wicksell, a Swedish economist, who raised a critique. In this case, if we assume that politics is a community or something like a community of discoverers, the theory would give advice to a benevolent dictator. We can think about climate policy and think about the role of science in climate policy. So, meaning, okay, if we have people who do not agree to the goals of climate policy, we can state, okay, this is the state of science, the results of a lot of research done in this field, and there's a consensus in science. But what about people who do not believe? Yeah? From this perspective, politics is a community of discoverers. We say, okay, they are insufficiently informed, or they are mistaken. Yeah? And of course, we hope that they can be persuaded by the good. So, final consideration, or let's say final consideration. What about majority votes or majority democracy in the non-contractual paradigm? Here, democracy is an institution for generating collective decisions, and we believe that democracy is a very good institution because it is efficient. Yeah? So the defense of democracy is already achieved if the errors in this, by making use of this institution, are fewer than in other procedures. So the defense of democracy is based solely on efficiency considerations. Yeah? If we have access to alternatives, dictatorship, science, for instance, let science overtake climate policy, and maybe this is the better alternative. And this is opposed to the contractarian model of policy. The contractarian model of policy suggests, okay, we believe in democracy because of the ability of democracy to express individual values. So any kind of evaluation criterion must also be applied to the institutional procedures themselves. And we can conclude that there is no conceptual difference between democracy and monarchy, merely they are different forms of identifying collective decisions. If we do not, if we believe that policy is something like the search for truth. Okay, next step, the central idea of the theory of Brahem and Buchanan is a contrast between contract theory and, let's say, a certain kind of organic common good theory. Yeah? From the perspective of contract theory, politics is a complex general process in which individuals contribute their evaluations with regard to specific goals, and assuming that there exists something like an organic common good theory, here we treat politics analogous to science as a discovery process. Okay, next step. Yeah? Again, we will have to talk about rationality, and I would like to highlight the ideas here by making use of two kind of, let's say, case studies or examples. So we have to talk about decision making, we have to talk about the idea of rationality. By the way, do we have a certain idea how to define rationality from a point of decision theory? Any idea how you would define this? What is your conception of rationality? Just try, make a suggestion. What do you think? What idea do we have from rationality? What's the meaning of rationality? Not emotional, okay. So you would like to exclude emotions. Yeah? So we believe in pure reasons, something like that. Reasoning, yeah? Okay, good idea. More ideas? Excluding emotions. Economic theory is very precise here with defining rationality. Decision theory is based on mathematics. It's based on certain axioms of on certain axioms. So the question is, what conditions must a rational preference ordering fulfill? Yeah? So the idea of decision making is, okay, we should evaluate a given set of alternatives. And evaluating means we should be able to select. Yeah, we should be able to select, to evaluate, to compare, and to select alternatives. And usually this means we believe that individuals are able to state so-called preference statement. Comparing alternatives could be driven by statements such as A is preferred to B, or B or A is not preferred to B, or starting point from microeconomics. In microeconomics here, you can also suggest A is of the same value to me. I'm indifferent between A and B. You see, quite interesting. Yeah, we do not exclude emotions here. Yeah? Okay, so we keep this in mind. We can think about three possible preference statements: preferred, not preferred, or being indifferent. And we assume, of course, we have to assume that when we have to make decisions as individuals as well as collectives, yeah, there should be a given set, a well-defined set of alternatives. Let's assume we have three alternatives, A, B, and C. Yeah? Economic theory suggests now a rational preference ordering must be first complete, second symmetric, third reflexive, and fourth transitive. What does this mean? Completeness and symmetry mean a rational individual is capable of comparing and evaluating all alternatives, regardless of the order of comparisons. By the way, you see, again, we do not rule out emotions here. Yeah? We talk about evaluations. Yeah? We talk about evaluations driven by subjective reasons, by subjective ideas. Yeah? Okay, the individual should be able to compare, to evaluate. Reflexivity means an alternative is at least as good as itself. Okay. And the third is important, transitivity. Let's assume that we have three alternatives, A, B, and C. And let's assume that a certain individual states, okay, for me A is preferred to B, first statement. Second statement, B is preferred to C, and then we can conclude from this, then A must be also preferred to C. Yeah? So if A preferred to B and B preferred to C, then A should also be preferred over C. Okay, this is what we assume as a minimum criterion for rationality. It describes a formal structure of rationality. Yeah? And it's interesting, we do not rule out any kind of reasoning for evaluating A is better than B and B is better than C, something like that. Yeah? We allow for any kind of individual evaluation criterion. The only thing we would like to see is a rational, you might say, a consistent preference ordering in the end. And this is a prerequisite we need for allowing or assuming that individuals are able to derive decisions. Yeah? So this is the core, the starting point in any kind of decision theory. We keep this in mind when we proceed now. We've seen, we can think about collective autonomy, and we can state even if democracy, now we move to collective rationality. Yeah? Yeah, we can say, okay, even if democracy is a form of collective autonomy, there will be also some, let's say, more or less functional doubts about Rousseau's ideal of self-legislation and the ability to derive collective decisions. Yeah, we will discuss this in a few minutes. Yeah, we will see that direct democracy can lead to arbitrary or to manipulated decisions. We can see that the aggregation of individual preferences will be associated with some problems of rationality and also some problems of impossibilities. Yeah? Okay, however, before examining these problems in more detail, we have to consider two entirely different issues. And these issues belong more or less to your point. What kind of arguments do we allow for when decision making? Now, what kind of arguments, what kind of information when deriving decisions as a collective, what kind of informations do we allow for? Yeah? And how do we use these informations? Yeah? So, the following two examples will illustrate this. Yeah? With the following two examples or case studies, we are in search for a collective preference ordering over given alternatives. So let's start with the first example. Yeah? This first case study. Maybe you know him, Dr. Mabuse. Yeah? Maybe you've heard about Dr. Mabuse. Let's assume Dr. Mabuse is a political extremist. He has hidden and armed a nuclear bomb here in Clausthal. And he demands that the city council should proclaim his new Reichsbürger constitution. That's his idea. Yeah? So he suggests the following: if the city council complies, he will disarm the bomb, but if the city council refuses his constitution, the bomb will explode, and we know everyone in Clausthal will die. Okay, story proceeds, and the city council refuses to do so. But fortunately, certain policemen captured Dr. Mabuse. He's interrogated, and the problem is he's unwilling to reveal the bomb's location. Now we have to make a collective decision. Yeah? We have two alternatives. The first alternative is, okay, we have him, yeah, we got him. Donald Trump would say, we got him. Yeah, now let's get the information. Yeah? He can be tortured to force him to reveal the location of the bomb. First alternative. Yeah? Second alternative, label D. Yeah? We can state torture is unacceptable, so the consequence of this would be all people in Clausthal will die. Okay. So this is our decision problem. We have two alternatives. Yeah? Alternative T and alternative D. Yeah? In the end, we would have to make, so as a collective, we would have to make a preference statement. T is better than D, or D is better than T, or we are just indifferent. Yeah? What kind of information should we make use of when considering about such kind of collective decision? Consequentialism in moral philosophy suggests a collective decision is about alternative social states. So the only thing we are interested in is what is the consequence of a certain alternative when we choose this alternative. The consequence is clear. Alternative T, Dr. Mabuse is tortured and the people of Clausthal will live, and the consequence of D is Dr. Mabuse is not tortured and the people of Clausthal will die. Okay. A certain group within consequentialism, especially in economic theory, is labeled welfarism. Yeah? Welfarism suggests in certain kinds of collective decision making, or let's say in all kinds of collective decision making, the only thing we are interested in is information about the preferences, or let's say utilities of people. How do people evaluate social states? On the opposite, we have liberalism. Yeah? Liberalism, the central point of liberalism is non-utility information such as autonomy of decision-making or fundamental rights or civil liberties become relevant. So the basic position of liberalism is utility arguments do not override individual rights. Okay, let's see, or forget about this slide. Let's see how we can make use of these distinctions. before we make use of these distinctions, we have to think about additional distinctions within consequentialism, within, you might say, economic theory. Yeah? Distinctions arise because of different answers with respect to these questions. First question is, can we assume interpersonal comparability of individual utility? Can we assume this? Yeah? We have a long history in welfare economics, and this question was highly debated. So in older welfare economics, the answer was, yes, of course we can. We need to do so. Yeah? We are not able to compare gains and losses. We are not able to derive any kind of social decisions. More recent welfare economics suggests no. We are not allowed to do so due to several reasons. There is no scientific reason to allow comparing between your utility and your utility. Yeah? Of course, when we make decisions, we have certain assumptions. Yeah? But any kind of assumption is based on subjective evaluation. Next question, should we assume ordinality or cardinality of utility information? Yeah? And more questions are, or additional questions are, what kind of preference aggregation would we like to do? Should we think about majority decisions? Should we think about utilitarianism? Remember the presentation of Johannes Müller-Salo here. There he presented Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism and moral philosophy, which is a certain idea about aggregating something like a common good as a sum of individual values, simple aggregation rule. Yeah? But we can think about other types of aggregation. We can think about John Rawls, we can think about border rules and so on. And another kind of criterion we make use of is with respect to, do we achieve a partial or a complete social preference? So let's see how this works. Proposed solution for our Dr. Mabuse problem. Yeah? What's the idea of welfarism? What does welfarism suggest? How to proceed here in this kind of problem? Yeah? First answer is from utilitarianism. Yeah? Think about Jeremy Bentham. Yeah? The common good is the sum of individual utilities. Yeah? Welfare is to achieve the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people, he pointed out. So we can state, with respect to the Dr. Mabuse problem, the aggregated utility gain at T, meaning torturing Dr. Mabuse, is higher than the utility loss at D. Yeah? As we compare the pain Dr. Mabuse would have to suffer, being object to torture, to the pain when all the Clausthal people will die. Yeah? The answer is clear. Yeah? So, utilitarianism obviously suggests T, we should prefer T over D. Yeah? Okay. We can also think about the so-called Pareto criterion. What is Pareto criterion? To bring it to the point, the idea of the Pareto criterion is, although we are not, or if we assume that we are not allowed to compare utilities directly, yeah, we can let people evaluate certain alternatives, and if we have two people and both people agree upon A is better than B, then it's clear. Although we cannot compare utility directly, but both of them state A is better than B, then A is a Pareto improvement. So A should be preferred. So adopting this criterion or this Pareto principle, we can say, Clausthal people will say T is better than D, of course. Yeah? But also Dr. Mabuse could say T is better than D because the argument life and torture is better than death without torture, yeah, is convincing. Yeah? Of course, we have to make the assumption, rational thinking. Yeah, we have to assume that he is aware that implementing his Reichsbürger idea as a social system or escaping is not possible. Yeah? So we might conclude that T is Pareto superior to D. So also the Pareto criterion suggests T is preferred over D. Okay, if we, within welfarism, if we say we don't want to engage in such kind of utility evaluations, we can let people vote. Yeah, let's make a majority vote. So let's make a vote. Let's make a vote. Who would, let's say, we have T, yeah, torturing, and we have D, not torturing. Yeah? Who would prefer alternative T here in the classroom? You should raise your hand. If you prefer T, you have to make a decision, T or D. Yeah? So who is going to prefer T, torturing Dr. Mabuse? Yeah, can you do so? You can organize a majority vote here in the online group. A BBB vote, I suggest.
You can vote offline. You can just raise your hand if you feel comfortable.
Okay, once again, T or D? Who's preferring T? Raise your hand if you prefer. Yes, of course.
That is the point.
You have to make a decision. Time's running out.
Or you die.
Time is running out. T or D? T or D? Raise your hand. T?
Yeah, but people wouldn't die directly because the bomb would be here, but he couldn't.
If we torture him, yeah, if we expose him to torture, yeah, he will tell us the location of his bomb, and this will allow us to disarm this bomb. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And if we do not torture him, he will not tell us the information, and everyone will die. You should ask Dr. Mabuse why we will die. This is his idea. He becomes the dictator. Yeah? It's like Donald Trump. Yeah? He becomes a dictator. Yeah? He's offering these solutions. Yeah? I want to have Greenland. Yeah? Don't know how to get it, but this is what I want. Yeah? And the same is here with Dr. Mabuse. T or D? Benjamin, do you have the online votes?
We have 3 so far, but Gina is just creating the poll to get the final result. Give us 30 more seconds.
Okay. Okay, think about this. I will ask later. Yeah? I think on the next slide there's another possibility. But, okay, forget welfarism for the moment. Yeah? You see, welfarism is about raising subjective arguments. Yeah? Let's move to liberalism. Yeah? What liberalism suggests? Yeah? You have a question? Ask. Yeah? Okay, T or D? Interesting. Yeah? Okay, let's move to liberalism. Yeah, what is liberalism? Would neglect to make something like a majority vote. Yeah? Liberalism suggests, okay, there's a fundamental right of Dr. Mabuse, and this right applies without any kind of restriction. So liberalism suggests, because it's fundamental right, we are not allowed to torture him. So first conclusion from liberalism is we should prefer D over T. Yeah? Okay, thinking in more detail about this, what does this mean? Dr. Mabuse in this case is granted the status of a dictator. Yeah? Or we can state the collective preference is determined solely by his preference. Okay.
Not sure how we get this far, but
I think the majority is with T.
Yeah,
The online majority is with T, I suggest. Yeah? Okay, welfarism, yeah, but here we are in liberalism, yeah, there's nothing where we can vote, yeah, this is about pure reasoning, yeah. Fundamental right of Dr. Mabuse has to be considered. But the conclusion is, okay, in this case he becomes a dictator, yeah. Why not thinking about the fundamental rights of the Goslar people? If we give fundamental right of the Goslar people priority, we would state, okay, even liberalism allows us to state torture is better than death. Yeah? But again, adopting the perspective of liberalism, the question arises, is life of Goslar people a higher legal good than freedom from torture? Yeah? Wouldn't this already be a utilitarian cost-benefit analysis? Question mark. The problem we see here is liberalism tends to become indifferent when we have rights in conflict. Yeah? A possible solution for this would be something like a random mechanism. Okay. Yeah? Similar example, maybe you know this. Ferdinand von Schirach wrote a nice book, Terror. Yeah? And the case study here in this book was, okay, there were some terrorists entering an airplane, hijacking an airplane, and this airplane was on the way to the Munich Allianz Arena. Yeah? 70,000 people there. And terrorists will move the airplane directly to this arena. Yeah? And the military forces are aware of this and send this major here, and he was able to shoot this hijacked airplane. Yeah? So 164 people died after doing this. Yeah? And this came to the court, and the objective of the court was to state, is he guilty or is he not guilty? Yeah? Similar to our Dr. Mabuse problem. There was a film in television some years ago, and after presenting this film on television, the television viewers had the possibility to make a vote, and the majority of 87% voted for not guilty. Yeah? For not guilty. So the pilot was not responsible for the downing, and only 13% voted for a guilty verdict. Yeah? I think this looks similar to the results of the online vote you just made here, Benjamin, right? Okay, let's proceed. Yeah? Next case study, democracy and collective rationality. Yeah? We move back from Donald Trump, Greenland, or Dr. Mabuse ideas. Now we come to, let's say, climate policy. Yeah? And one measure of climate policy to prevent or in order to protect against temperature heating is, okay, why shouldn't we introduce a solar panel mandate? What's this? We can label this a solar obligation. Each single house owner will be obliged to install a solar panel on the roof of his or her building. Yeah, that's the idea. Possible example. Yeah? It is discussed in politics. Yeah? Should we have such kind of solar obligation, yeah, as a measure of climate policy? Yeah? This would require every property owner to install such kind of solar panel. Yeah? Don't get me wrong, this case study is not about, is this a good idea from climate policy or climate science? Yeah? This is only about decision making. Yeah? So we are in search for a collective decision. Yeah? Solar obligation, yeah, versus, let's say, no solar obligation, status quo. Yeah? And once again, we are in search for a collective preference ordering. Yeah, do we prefer SO over NSO, or do we prefer NSO over SO, or do we state, or we are just indifferent? Political discussion. Yeah? Let's go back to the ideas of liberalism, welfarism, consequentialism. We assume that we have a given set of alternatives. Yeah, this set is labeled X. Yeah, we have a set of X, labeled X, where we have alternatives. For instance, solar obligation, no solar obligation. What the idea of consequentialism now suggests is that there is an empirical, or let's say empirical causal relationship between the consequences of a decision or of an alternative. Yeah? So this means there are consequences, a set of K, yeah, which is attributing consequences of social states. Yeah? For instance, consequences of alternative solar obligation can be expressed in terms of climate protection. Yeah? What is the quantity of CO2 reduction we can achieve? Yeah? We can also define cost, yeah, opportunity cost of doing so, investment cost, and so on, as a certain kind of consequence. We can talk about utility or benefit. We can talk about efficiency. We can talk about, or we can raise issues with respect to how does this alternative address or influence the distribution of income and wealth. Yeah? All these aspects are something like consequences of a certain alternative. So the set of consequences now delivers a preference ordering over the set of alternative. The idea, therefore, of consequentialism is the evaluation of the elements of set K yields an order of K which, by assuming the inverse function, leads to an order of X. If the consequences of SO are better than the consequences of NSO, we will prefer SO. That's the idea of consequentialism. Yeah? For instance, SO is better than NSO and should be chosen because it can save 20% of annual CO2 emissions. Yeah? Might be an argument. I don't say that this is true, but this would be an argument. Yeah? Deontology or non-consequentialism, where you can also take liberalism, yeah, would state an order of X is established through arguments that are not, or let's say not only oriented towards K, towards the consequences. So the actions should be in accordance with generalizable norms, obligations, rights, responsibilities, and so on. Yeah? So we might state, adopting such kind of position, that NSO should be chosen because the restriction of property right owners' freedom is not compatible with more general norms. Yeah? Don't get me wrong, this is not about answering the question, should we introduce a solar obligation or not? This is only about raising arguments. Yeah? If we adopt a more general perspective, unfortunately I don't get my animation here in the slide. Yeah? If we adopt a more general perspective in economic theory, we can deliver different kind of answers to such kind of questions. Yeah? Along the horizontal dimension, we distinguish between welfarism and liberalism. Within welfarism, we distinguish between comparability of utility and non-comparability of utility. And with respect to liberalism, we can distinguish between, let's say, individual freedom in terms of negative liberty rights, freedom from. Yeah? And this, and another variant of liberalism is more with respect to positive liberty rights. And along the vertical axis here, we can think about consequentialism versus non-consequentialism. Yeah? And as we assume, as we adopt such kind of map, yeah, we can sort all kind of economic approaches to how do we deal with the common good into certain groups. For instance, utilitarian welfare conceptions. Yeah? Bergson or Jeremy Bentham, as suggested by Johannes Müller-Salo. Yeah? Or we can engage directly in measuring happiness or subjective well-being. There's a branch within economic theory which uses this as a method. And if we say, no, we do not want to engage in utility comparison for certain reasons, yeah? We can engage in Parisian welfare economics, we can engage in compensation tests, we can engage in social choice theory. Yeah, we will get contact to this in a few minutes. And if we move to liberalism, yeah, we can think about procedural theories, yeah, as I introduced one of them from Buchanan, contract theories. And we can also think about ideas of Amartya Sen with respect to capabilities and SDGs, or we can think about the theory of John Rawls, yeah, with respect to primary goods. So this gives a map, yeah, of possibilities of different approaches to this question of collective decision making with respect to the common good. But we want to go further on with our examples, with our case study. The next item we have to consider is collective rationality and impossibility theorems. What does this mean? The central question here is, again, how can we construct a logically consistent social preference order from individual preference orderings? Yeah? Please note, yeah, we refer to the idea of rationality. Yeah? Rationality meaning completeness, transitivity, reflexivity, and transitivity. Yeah? We say preference ordering should fulfill all these criteria. Yeah? We adopt these ideas when making individual decisions, but we say, okay, the same conditions also should hold for collective decisions, because we want, even if we face conflict of interest, yeah, but in the end, if we want to make a collective decision, this should be a consistent decision. Yeah? Starting point. Okay, therefore now we are going to vary the example. Yeah? We started with thinking about solar obligation. Yeah? Of course, climate politics, climate economics, environmental economics is about a large set of instruments, how to tackle climate change. Yeah? We can say, okay, solar obligation might be an instrument. We can think about emission trading. Yeah? In environmental economics, this is the most preferred instrument to cover this problem. Yeah? So let's think about emission trading, yeah, as an alternative. And we can think also about a third alternative. Yeah? I suggest some of us don't like this alternative, but on the political marketplace, it becomes an alternative: nuclear power. Yeah? Don't get me wrong, I don't say we should think about nuclear power, but this is a case study. Yeah? So let's assume on the political marketplace we have these three alternatives: solar obligation, emission trading, nuclear power. And let's assume the whole society consists only of three individuals: Jacob, Niels, and Helene. Yeah? Looks very nice, very easy. We have three alternatives and we have three individuals. And moreover, in order to not complicate matters, yeah, we assume that all these individuals, Jacob, Niels, and Helene, have already a consistent individual rational preference ordering, which fulfills all these axioms I introduced a few minutes ago. Yeah? So the question now is, how do we translate these individual preferences with respect to these three alternatives to collective preference ordering? So we need a decision mechanism. Yeah? Majority vote, something like that. Yeah? So I suggest we start with a very prominent idea. This means let's engage in pairwise voting on the alternatives. Pairwise voting, adopting the idea of majority decisions. Okay, let's see how this works. Pairwise voting. Here on the left, you see Jacob. Yeah? Jacob's individual preference. Jacob says, I prefer solar obligation over emission trading, and I don't like to see nuclear power. Niels is different, more liberal, you might say. Yeah? Niels suggests, I think emission trading is the best. Yeah, and I prefer emission trading over nuclear power, and I don't like to see solar obligation. And Helene says, yeah, I like to see nuclear power. Maybe it's the cheapest kind of energy we can think about. Yeah, and I prefer this over solar obligation, and I don't want to see emission trading. Yeah? You see, all these individuals have a rational preference ordering. Now we start with pairwise voting. What does this mean, pairwise voting? Pairwise means we need to select a pair when starting. Yeah? First option, we start with voting solar obligation against emission trading. Yeah? This is where we start. We let this society vote over solar obligation versus emission trading, and then we say, okay, the winner should then be voted against nuclear power. Okay, so let's start with solar obligation versus emission trading, and we see Jacob prefers solar obligation over emission trading. Niels says emission trading is better than SO, and Helene says solar obligation is better than ET, so solar obligation wins majority 2-1. Okay. Second step, now we eliminated emission trading, solar obligation is a winner, and in the final, the winner has to fight against nuclear power. Okay, let's see how this works. Jakob says solar obligation is better than nuclear power. Niels said nuclear power is better than solar obligation, and Helena also says nuclear power is better. So nuclear power is selected. Majority vote. So the majority voted for nuclear power. Okay, think about a different approach. Let's start in the first round with comparing solar obligation against nuclear power, and then let the winner be voted against emission trading. Okay, first round. Yeah? Solar obligation versus nuclear power. Jacob says solar is better than SO is better than NP. Niels says NP is better than SO, and Helene says NP is better than SO. So NP wins 2-1. So NP has to be voted against ET in the next round, and we see Jacob says ET is better than NP. Niels also says ET is better than NP, and Helene says NP is better than ET, but it's minority, so ET is selected. Wow. ET is the result of the majority vote. Now think about the third option. Yeah, not astonishing, I suggest. Let's start with ET against nuclear power. Yeah. We see in the first step ET versus NP. Jacob says ET is better than NP. Niels also says ET is better than NP, so ET is selected. Then ET is voted against ET is voted against SO. And here we see SO becomes the winner. So SO is selected. So we have three alternatives. We made a transparent majority vote. All the individuals have rational preference orderings, and the result is NP or ET or SO, intransitivity. Yeah? This means, okay, it seems that this society, in the very simple example, this society is not able to derive a decision. The basic story of this, let's say, preference reversal goes back to him, Marquis de Condorcet. In social choice, this is labeled the Condorcet paradoxon, the Condorcet voting paradoxon. Yeah? He stated that majority rule is inherently self-contradictory. Yeah? This implies that it's logically impossible for any voting system to guarantee that a winner will have support from a majority of voters, even if every voter's individual preferences are rational, and therefore we have the problem of self-contradiction. Yeah? Condorcet was a mathematician, a liberal. Yeah? He joined French Revolution, became a member of the Legislative National Assembly and also its president, but then he got problems with Robespierre and died in prison. Yeah? Okay, so this example, yeah, was labeled the Condorcet paradoxon. And in economic theory, yeah, and we might say in social science, this was investigated or discussed as a logical defect in majority voting. Yeah? We had a discussion for about 170 years in the literature, which raised the question of whether we have a very special problem or this is a general problem. Yeah? And it was Kenneth Arrow, yeah, who was able in 1951, in his famous article, Social Choice and Individual Values, who showed this is a general problem. Yeah? Kenneth Arrow was awarded with a Nobel Prize together with John Hicks in 1972. And his statement is, or his conclusion is, in general, there is no collective preference ordering that can be derived from individual preference orderings over the set of social states, and that simultaneously satisfies certain ethical conditions. Yeah, so this impossibility theorem calls into question the logical and theoretical possibility of democratic decisions. Okay, we can think about Kenneth Arrow, who was a very interesting man in economic theory. But more interesting is, of course, since the 50s of the last century, we had a lot in the literature, we had a lot of attempts to overcome or to solve this impossibility theorem. And one solution would be the following. Yeah? One solution would be the following. Yeah? The idea of this, or the assumption of this impossibility theorem of Arrow, this generalization of Condorcet paradox, was we allow for any kind of individual preference. We allow for any kind of individual preferences, so there's no restriction. Yeah? Take the first row here. Yeah? You see Jacob, Niels and Helene and preference orderings. And let's assume that it is possible to express these preference statements in terms of, let's say, a utility function. Yeah? The only information we obtain from this function, yeah, is, let's say, the strengths of utility. Yeah? For instance, take Jacob. Jacob says with respect to SO, I would, if in the case of SO, my level of utility, my benefit, I would realize in this social state is high. In the case of ET, emission trading, my level of utility is, let's say, medium, and the lowest utility I would feel is in the case of nuclear power. Yeah? Okay, say, look at Niels and look at Helene. It seems that Jacob and Niels have a unipeak preference. There's only one peak here. Yeah? With Jacob, the peak is with SO. With Niels, the peak is ET. The problem is Helene has two peaks. The first peak is with SO and the second peak is with NP. Now the idea is, okay, if we would only allow, when having a collective decision, if we only allow for unipeak preferences, we can overcome this impossibility theorem, this Condorcet paradox. Yeah? Think about a second variation or a second variant of Helene's preference here. The only thing we do is we switch or we change position 2 and 3 in her preference ordering. The original preference ordering was NP is preferred over SO and SO is preferred over ET. Now we change ET and SO in her preference ordering. This is the only thing we do here. Yeah? Now Helene becomes the blue curve here. Yeah? Now you can, if you are interested in, yeah, you can run the same mechanism of pairwise voting. Do you have an idea which is the alternative which will win in any case of procedure? ET, right. It will be ET. Yeah? Okay, so one, let's say, theoretical or technical possibility to overcome this, this problem is to allow only for unipeak preferences. Okay, let's go further. Okay, we've seen logical problems, yeah, with respect to the ability, to our ability to aggregate individual preference to a consistent collective preference. But there are additional problems labeled manipulability. So we have another group of objections to welfare economic solutions. Yeah? And these objections have to do with, let's say, strategic behavior of individuals in collective decision making. What does this mean, strategic behavior? Individual preferences, when adopting strategic behavior, are better served by feeding false information. That's the idea, yeah? And there is an interesting debate in our science labeled the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem, which who stated a procedure of aggregating individual preferences is called manipulable if there are situations in which a participant who knows both the procedure and the voting behavior of all other participants can improve the chances of one alternative by voting for another, or worsen the chances of an alternative by voting for it. Yeah? Also, the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem is based on a large set of mathematical considerations. We forget these ideas, these details for the moment, and go back to our example to show the relevance of the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem. Now we deliver another variation, or we discuss another variation of our climate policy example. Yeah? Remember, we had 3 alternatives: solar obligation, emission trading, nuclear power, and now we also allow for a fourth alternative. Yeah, here you see him, Mr. Millet from Argentina, who says, well, the best idea we can have is deregulation. Yeah? Deregulation. Yeah? Deregulation of energy markets, and we hope that, we believe that individuals are better able to address all these issues than the policy or science or everyone is able to do. Yeah? So we have a fourth alternative. Yeah? So we have alternative solar obligation, SO, ET, NP, and the fourth alternative is labeled DR, deregulation. Now we assume the society consists of 4 groups, not individuals, but 4 groups. We have Jacob, the group Jacob with 24 members. We have the group Niels with 29 members, and with the group Helene 32 members, and we have a very small group, the T's group. Yeah? He's labeled T's, or his fraction is labeled T's. Yeah? You see the yellow part here of society. Yeah? All of these groups have consistent preferences. Yeah? All of these groups have consistent preferences with respect to these 4 alternatives. And now we make use of another kind of decision mechanism. This is labeled integrated run-off voting or instant run-off voting. Yeah? In German, we label this integrierte Stichwahlen. Yeah? That's the idea. Okay, once again, 4 alternatives, 4 groups or 4 fractions of people having consistent preference order. Okay, let's start. Here it doesn't work, Benjamin, because can we see my animations? Because here it's not possible. Okay, I try to. Maybe this works with this slide. Yeah. Okay, let's start here with this slide. The next slide. Okay, so let's assume the starting point. We have here on the left side the true group preferences. Yeah? Jacob, Niels, Helene, and Thies. Yeah? With respect to these 4 alternatives. The group Jacobs, or the fraction of Jacob, says SO is preferred over ET and NP and DR. Yeah? Niels says ET is preferred over NP, NP is preferred over SO, and SO preferred over DR, and so on. Yeah? So all of them have a rational preference ordering, and the decision rule now is we engage in integrated run-off votes. What does this mean? Yeah, we make an election. Yeah? We make an election, and each group tells which is the preferred, most preferred alternative, the second most preferred alternative, which is the third most, and which is on position number 4. Yeah? And we ask, okay, which is the alternative? We are in search for an alternative which addresses the majority, the absolute majority of votes. Yeah? Okay, we see Jacob says SO is preferred, Niels says ET, Helene says NP, and T says DR. Okay, what's happening here? The idea of integrated run-off votes is, in the first round of voting, when there is no absolute majority, and there is no, there is you might say, a relative majority with Helene. Helene stands for the largest group, and the largest group says NP is the most preferred alternative, but it's only a relative majority, it's not an absolute majority. Yeah? The thing we do now is we eliminate the alternative which gets the least number of votes, and obviously this is DR. Yeah? The group T says, okay, 15 votes say we want to see Mr. Millet deregulation. So we eliminate DR. Okay, next round. Yeah? We eliminate DR. Yeah? In each row we eliminate DR, and again we count the first votes, and we see again there is no absolute majority. Now we eliminate the alternative which gets the least number of votes within the group of remaining alternatives, and this is ET. Now we eliminate ET. Yeah? We can understand this when we go back. Yeah. Okay, we eliminate ET. Yeah? You see? Don't agree? Okay, I tried to express this. Yeah? Okay, first is, yeah, you agree? In the first round, we eliminate DR. Yeah? Okay, we eliminate DR. So DR is skipped here and there and there and there. Okay, next step. Now again, we count the the votes, and the votes are SO plus SO here, ET here, and NP there, 24, 29, 32, and we also have 24 plus 15, because T now says SO among the remaining alternatives is most preferred. But again, 15 plus 24 is less than 29 plus 32. Yeah? So there's no absolute majority. So again, we skip the alternative, which the least performance here, and this is ET. And if we do so, the picture looks this. We eliminated DR, we eliminated ET, and what's happening now? NP is selected. We have only two remaining alternatives, and Jacob and T say, okay, we would prefer SO, but Niels and Helene say we prefer NP. So NP wins 61 over 39 votes. That's a result. By the way, this is a usual mechanism we obviously use in political reality. That's the way how we gather information about the most preferred alternative. Okay, NP is elected. Agree? Okay, that's a result. But see what's the problem with NP? The problem of NP is, or there is not a problem of NP, but take the perspective of the smallest group, T's. The group of T's consists of 15 members, and the preferences of these members is, okay, now NP is selected. This is the thing we would like to avoid. We don't like to see this. We are the smallest party here in the parliament or on the political marketplace, but the collective is voting for the thing we don't want to see, we want to avoid. Why not engaging in strategic behavior? Because we understand the rules and because we know what the others want to do. Okay. What's happening now? The group of T's now is changing the preference. I'm sorry, I'm not able to show this directly because of the missing animations here on the slide. You see, the group of T's, it's interesting, the group of T's now switches NP, which is the least preferred alternative, given the true preferences, to position 1. Meaning, when voting, they vote for the alternative they don't want to see. So, the manipulated preferences of the T's group now are here. The only thing we do is we move NP from the last position to the first position. Okay. Now we run the same mechanism. We see in the first round there's no absolute majority. Again, DR is eliminated. In round 2, again, there is no absolute majority, but now the picture changes. Now SO is eliminated. And then in the last round, NP is voted against ET, and counting votes, we see ET wins with 53 to 47 votes. In the end, assuming the new or manipulated structure of T's group preference, T's group is able to prevent that NP is selected. They can change only by stating manipulated preferences, they can change the whole result. That's the idea of the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theory. Altogether, to sum up and to come to the final, altogether we might say, okay, we see a lot of problems, yeah? We see a lot of problems, yeah? Welfare solution to the collective decision problems suffer from, let's say, logical impossibilities and manipulability, yeah? A way out might be liberalism, yeah? What's the idea of liberalism? Remember, liberalism raises some doubts with respect to the ability of collective decision making. Liberalism says, okay, there should be an area of individual decision making where individuals can choose for themselves. Where the individual preference can't be overruled by a collective preference. Yeah? This, for instance, was a position of John Stuart Mill. Yeah? He stated there are areas of human life over which only the individual should decide. Yeah? Think about becoming a vegetarian or eating meat. Yeah? A liberal position would say, okay, yeah, it's a private decision. Yeah? So maybe we can overcome some of these problems adopting a more liberal position and saying, okay, yeah, we accept that so this is the precise conclusion from this. We accept that the collective preference should not overrule individual preferences in certain areas. First position. And the second point we bring in here is, okay, we've seen that there is a certain criterion within liberalism which is something like an ethical minimal condition. This is labeled the Pareto criterion. Yeah? Comparing two alternatives, or let's say we have two alternatives out of a set of three, and we have two individuals, and both individuals say, I prefer A over B. Yeah? In this case, yeah, we don't know by what extent A is preferred over B. Yeah? But the only thing we know, both individuals say, I prefer A over B. Yeah? So you might say there is something like a consensus. Both agree in this. Yeah? And the Pareto criterion says, okay, in this case, yeah, when we have no conflict of interest, the collective preference should reflect this. Yeah? That's the idea. Okay, and this was addressed by another paradox in social decision theory, which goes back to Amartya Sen, 1970, the impossibility of a Puritan liberal assumptions. Yeah? Amartya Sen says we assume collectively and individual rational preferences in line with completeness, transitivity, and so on. We also allow for the Pareto criterion. Yeah? So we build the same model as Arrow did, yeah, for his impossibility theorem. Yeah? We make the same assumption, but there's an additional assumption. Sen says this is minimal liberalism. Yeah? We say there are cases of decisions where individuals decide locally. Exactly this means at least two individuals may decide locally on at least two alternatives if, for example, individual one locally decides for A over B and prefers A, yeah, A over B, then A should also be preferred to be in the collective preference ordering. Yeah? So the collective preference ordering should respect, for instance, if I say I prefer being a vegetarian over eating meat, for instance. Yeah? Okay, so the intuition, the idea is, yeah, liberalism rejects the ideas of aggregating and balancing of individual preferences, but liberalism accepts collective decisions only if they are unanimous, yeah? Which are in line with the Pareto criterion. And the liberalism suggests that individuals locally dominate the collective preference in certain areas. Yeah? These two ideas. Okay, let's go back to the final example. Yeah? Now the world becomes very simple. We have only two individuals. We have Jacob and Matthias. Yeah? Jacob and Matthias decide about a solar panel on the roof. Yeah? Let's assume we have three alternatives. Yeah? Alternative SM is solar panels are being installed at Matthias' house. SJ is solar panels are installed at Jacob's house, and NS is no solar energy. Yeah? Solar energy will be banned. No one should own a solar power system. Yeah? These three alternatives. Okay, let's start with thinking about Matthias. Yeah? Matthias is annoyed by climate protection and all these wokeness, you say. Yeah? And he says, I don't like to see solar panels. Yeah, but okay, if we can't ban solar panels, I prefer to have a panel on my roof instead of seeing the solar panel at Jacob. Yeah? I'm annoyed, but if I can't prevent solar panels, give it to me. Yeah? So his preference ordering is he prefers NS over SM and SM over SJ. Rational preference ordering. Yeah? Take a look at Jacob. Yeah? Jacob wants to see as many solar panels as possible. Yeah? And if in doubt, yeah, at least at Matthias' place. Yeah? Because he says, okay, in case, yeah, he might become interested in this kind of energy, in this kind of climate policy. Yeah? He might, it's a good idea to send this solar panel to him. Yeah? So his preference ordering is, first best is bring the solar panel to Matthias' roof. Yeah? Second best is bring the solar panel to my own roof. And the thing I won't like to see is won't like to see banning of solar panels. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, you see, it's quite different as Matthias. Matthias says, I would like to ban solar panels, and if I'm not able to ban solar panels, yeah, give it to me. Okay, now let's construct a social preference ordering. Yeah? Let's start with the liberalism reservation. What does this mean here? Yeah? Everyone should be allowed to decide for themselves whether they want to have a solar system on the roof or to ban. Yeah? What does this mean? Yeah, we see Matthias who says, yeah, I don't want to see any kind of solar panel. Yeah, I prefer this over having this here on my roof. Yeah? This is his position. And Jacob says, with respect to this question, yeah, of course, give it to me. Yeah? It's better to have it here with me on my roof than banning. Yeah? Minimal liberalism condition. Yeah? And then look at the Pareto criterion. Pareto criterion says if there is agreement, yeah, also over certain alternatives, also the collective order should reflect this agreement. And the agreement is, due to which reason, whatever, this is not our objective, yeah? Whether driven by emotions or by whatever. Yeah? We have to accept this. Yeah? So there is agreement among Jacob and Matthias to say, we together prefer SM over SJ. Yeah? We have different reasons, but we agree on this. Yeah? Okay. What's the result? The result is, as we match both ideas, we have an intransitive social preference. NS is preferred over SM, SM is preferred over SJ, and SJ is preferred over NS. Yeah? You see, a certain kind, an additional kind of logical impossibility adopting a liberal position. Yeah? By the way, yeah, this was written by Amartya Sen. Yeah? His motivation to do so was to bring something to the debate, to the scientific debate, which is something like a negative answer to the arrow impossibility theorem. Remember, Arrow says, okay, in a democracy we are not able, you might say this could be a very rough conclusion, but in a democracy we are not able to, having majority votes or other kind of preference aggregation, to solve our problems. Yeah? So if as a collective we are not able to do so, the only possibility lies in liberalism. Yeah? And the idea of Sen was, okay, I can show you that we have the same or similar problems when adopting a more liberal position. Okay, let's come to an end, or let's say outlook. Yeah? Question is there any hope? Yeah? Is there any hope facing so many impossibility theorems and objections against collective and democratic decision making? Is there any hope? Of course there is. Yeah? Take, for instance, Julian Nieder-Rümelin, a very prominent philosopher and decision researcher. He says, yes, of course. Yeah? It is possible to solve the problems of the liberalism paradox of Sen. Yeah? We have to reconcile liberalism and welfare. And this has to do with collective autonomy, he states. It's possible. And he says, okay, also with respect to the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem, remember, Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem told us, okay, it is possible that, let's say, evil groups of people are able to manipulate the decisions. He suggests, if we imagine citizens as individual utility maximizers on the political marketplace, then the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem guarantees chaos. However, the stronger the deliberative moment in democracy, the more irrelevant the findings of the theorem. And with respect to the Condorcet, or let's say Arrow theorem, we say, yes, of course. In reality, it is not possible to have a perfect type of democracy. It's not possible. Think about ideas of liquid democracy. Think about we are the people. Think about Brexit and so on. So some mechanisms to establish elements of direct democracy. Several years ago, we had a political party which was driven by this idea, direct democracy. We can solve any kind of problem here. The only thing we have to do is we have to guarantee that everything is collective on the net. The Piratenpartei was driven by the idea. And Julian Nieder-Rümelin says no. Even if technically possible, such kind of ideas will not replace the parliamentary system of consultation and decision making. And the last vote should go back to Amartya Sen, where we started. In a very interesting, very famous article in 1977, labeled "Rational Fools," he's dead. Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize winner in 1998, in economic theory, stated, in such elections, people may often be guided not so much by maximization of expected utility, but something much simpler, just a desire to record one's true preference. If this desire reflects a sense of, he says, commitment, then the behavior in question would be at variance with the view of man in traditional economics theory. With this citation, I would like to end my presentation, my lecture here, and to give you an outlook. If you are interested in such kind of decisions, I can refer to a very interesting debate taking place with Christian Felber, Gemeinwohlökonomie. I think you've seen him in last summer, where we had the 250 anniversary here at University of Technology Clausthal. He gave a lecture there, and he is organizing a conference, Economy for the Common Good International Conference in 2026, which takes place in Hamburg. Yeah, if you're interested in, take a look here at this homepage. I will also be engaged here on this conference, and yeah, if you are interested in, join us there at this conference. And to come to the final, thank you for your attention. If you are interested in such kind of debate, of course, this is the advertisement blog. Take a look into my textbook, written together with my friend Michael Tides. Thank you very much. Oh, yes.
So, not sure why the camera is not looking at me, but anyway, thank you very much for this interesting talk. I guess after a short introduction it became clear how this is relevant towards the topic that, or the course itself, because even though there might be arguments for A, B, or C, we still have to somehow figure out how everyone agrees on a certain structure, and a lot of interesting ideas are often not tested, not coming into place, because we just cannot agree on certain aspects. So, thank you very much. Very insightful. We'll cut the recording now, take it to a short 5-minute coffee break. Then you still have, of course, the opportunity to also ask questions to the expert before he disappears. There are at least 2 questions already in the shared notes, or you can also just type them in the chat or unmute yourself, but please, let's do that after a short break and then without the recording, so everyone can feel free to ask any question. Thank you very much, and see you in 5 minutes.
Yeah.